Have you ever stopped to wonder where our ideas of right and wrong actually come from? Is morality something we discover, like a law of physics, or is it something we invent, like a piece of art? Let's really get into this, because honestly, how you answer that question changes, well, it changes everything about how we see ourselves and the world. And this right here, this is the big one. For most of human history, the answer would have been a really firm no. Morality was just seen as part of the fabric of the universe. But today? Well, today we're living in a world that leans heavily toward a different answer, one that puts the source of all morality squarely inside of us. You hear it all the time, right? We talk about my values, family values, company values. That's the language of what's called value ethics. And it's this idea that morality isn't grounded in some external reality, but in what we decide is valuable. But what we're going to explore today is how this is actually a pretty recent and frankly a really radical idea with some huge consequences. Okay, so what does it actually mean to live in a world where morality is just a matter of values? Let's take a look at where this idea ultimately leads us. This quote from Nietzsche really just cuts right to the heart of it. If we're the ones creating values, what are we creating them for? Nietzsche's answer was pretty direct: to enhance life, to increase our own will to power. From this point of view, values aren't about universal good or evil. They're just tools for our own survival and growth. And that leads directly to this next point. If values are just our invention, then of course they can't be universal. Think about it. The source material we're looking at argues that even a brilliant thinker like Kant, who tried so hard to create a universal moral law, was really just expressing the specific worldview, the ethos of his time and place, an 18th century Prussian. His whole idea of a goodwill being the ultimate good, well, that would have made almost no sense to an ancient Aztec warrior or a Greek tragic hero like Oedipus. So you have to ask, how did we get here? How did we go from thinking morality was out there in the world to believing it's in here, inside our heads? Well, there was this fundamental pivot in Western thought. Let's trace that journey. This timeline basically maps out the whole story. You start with the ancient Greeks. For them, ethics wasn't some separate rulebook. It came from their ethos, their shared character, their way of being in the world together. Then, boom, along comes Descartes with, I think, therefore I am. And suddenly, the individual thinking self, the subjectum, is the new center of the universe. It's the one thing we can be sure of. Kant then builds on this, saying the moral law isn't out in the cosmos, it's inside the rational mind of that individual. And finally, Nietzsche takes that last, huge step. This individual doesn't just find morality inside them, they actively create it. So let's really break this down and put these two worldviews side by side. On one side, you've got the ancient view. We are in the world, and we discover ethics in the very nature of reality itself, what they called physis. But on the other side, you've got the modern view. The world becomes an object for me, and my own mind is what creates ethical meaning. Really, it all comes down to this massive shift from discovery to creation. So let's fast forward a bit and see how this idea develops in the 20th century, which is where this concept of ethics as a purely human invention really takes off. This quote from Nietzsche is so provocative, and it really captures the final destination of this whole journey inward. If the individual is the source of all meaning, then what that individual creates, like art, becomes more valuable, more important than any objective truth we might find out there in the world. Human invention gets put on a pedestal, high above reality. And you see this pushed even further with philosophers like Husserl, who argued that it's our consciousness that literally gives sense to the world. And of course, Jean-Paul Sartre famously declared that existence precedes essence. What he meant was, we're all born as blank slates, and it's through our choices that we invent who we are and what we value. So the world itself, it offers no guidance. It's just raw material for us to shape with our will. So what's the big takeaway from all this? The consequence of this entire historical shift is that our moral compass has become completely unmoored. It's cut loose. By severing that connection between ethics and reality, or being, we're left to drift in the sea of subjectivity, forced to invent our own North Star from scratch. But what if there's another way? The source material we're digging into suggests that to find a real foundation for ethics, we have to perform what it calls a destruction of this modern viewpoint, to try and recover a forgotten path. Now, this isn't about mindless destruction. It's more like a careful deconstruction. The idea is, first, you have to uncover all the historical baggage we've been carrying, all these modern assumptions about the individual being the center of everything. Then you dismantle that framework so you can see what it's been hiding.
And finally, the whole goal is to rediscover a much more ancient and maybe more enduring foundation for ethics.
And that forgotten foundation is called ontological ethics. Now, I know that sounds a little heavy, right? But the core idea is actually pretty simple, and it's something that, once upon a time, was just common sense. It's the belief that ethics isn't separate from reality. Instead, the very structure of being, of existence itself, is ethical. This means morality isn't something we invent and project onto the world. It's something we discover woven right into the fabric of the universe. This quote from the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus just nails it. He talks about a logos, a kind of deep logic or understanding of reality that's common to all of us. It's a shared truth we can all tap into. And yet, he says, most people live as if their own private wisdom, their own personal values, were the only thing that mattered. It's incredible, really. He was basically diagnosing our modern condition more than 2,000 years ago. So when you boil it all down, we're left with a pretty fundamental choice. Is ethics about the human will creating value, an expression of our own power? Or is it about listening, about responding to a truth that reveals itself within reality? Is it an act of shouting our demands at the world, or is it an act of quiet understanding? And that brings us right here to our final question. After this whole journey from the ancient world to our own, we really have to ask ourselves, is our moral life ultimately a monologue, just a declaration of our own will shouted into the void? Or is it a dialogue, an answer to a call that comes from somewhere beyond ourselves, from the very nature of being itself? The path we choose really does shape not just our ethics, but the very way we live in the world.